Amplify is everything you need as a full stack developer to develop a front-end app with a cloud-based backend. Are you curious to learn more? Stay tuned. Good morning, this is Friday. Friday we're talking about all things cloud and all things developers related in the AWS Developers Podcast. So please register. We're available on Spotify, on Deezer, on YouTube, on Amazon Music, on Apple Podcast, of course. And send us your feedback. That's how we know what is interesting for you and what type of subject we should plan for the next session. Last 2 weeks, we talked a lot about serverless. We talked with Derek about AppSync and GraphQL API. Last week, it was with Oli and Julian. We talked about the state of serverless in 2024. We're going to continue talking about serverless, but in a different way. If you are a front-end developer developing a mobile or a web application, stay tuned because I have the pleasure to welcome Mohamed Salih Gouler. You are a developer advocate for Amplify. What is Amplify?
Hello, Seb. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this podcast. Directly, let's jump into answering the question. Amplify is the set of tools that we provide to the developers to create cloud-powered front-end applications. We give them tools and turn front-end developers into full-stack developers. So if they have an idea, they build the front-end and we power the backend or provide them libraries that they can connect to their backends, or even UI components that they can directly connect to the backends as well. This way, they can turn their applications into cloud-powered, fast-paced, full-stack applications with the help of Amplify.
Yeah, sometimes for me it's difficult to define Amplify because there is a command line, there is a framework, and there are UI components, as you said. So let's try to break that down. The target here is front-end developer. So developers that are building web or mobile application. And as a front-end developer, I don't know or I don't want to know much about the complexity of the cloud. So what Amplify does for me, what are the building blocks that it brings and how it brings these building blocks?
Amplify itself is an abstraction layer for you. It will take care of providing and provisioning all the cloud resources. So like you wanted, we actually do not give you any extra hassle to create your cloud resources. What we do is we ask you what you want from us. Do you want to have authentication? Do you want to have data? Or do you want to have storage? Whatever you want to do, we will ask you first. And once you do that, we will get this information and provide a backend for you. And how you will connect is the Amplify libraries. We will provide you a set of libraries that is written with the language of your platform. For example, if you have a web application with React, we have JavaScript libraries that you can use to connect directly to these backends automatically. Or if you have a mobile application or cross-platform application like Flutter, if you want to use Dart, you can use the Dart libraries to directly connect to any backend that you have created. So for a front-end developer, basically they need to tell us what they want. We will provision that backend. But if they want to connect to that backend, we also provide the libraries that they can continue to use.
And that's why there are these two parts. The command line is to create and manage the backend, and then the libraries are native in my programming language. We are going to talk about all the platforms supported in a minute, but they allow to connect with high-level API the backend that I just created. And I don't need to be an AWS expert. I don't need to know all the service names and everything. You mentioned, you use words in your description that are close to what I know. Authentication, data access, storage, that I know. I don't need to know that it maps to Cognito, to an API, or to S3.
The idea is to keep it as intuitive as possible. So when someone wants to upload a file, they need to call upload file function. They shouldn't call a function called go to S3.
S3 or put object or something.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, the idea is to keep it as intuitive as possible. So they will learn it by even guessing what they need to do. They can say, I want to log in. I want to log in with social providers. What should I call? You will call Amplify Auth login with social provider. These kind of things.
And social provider is Google, Facebook, X, and the others in that case. well, what I really like as a developer when I use Amplify is that it makes a lot of choices for me. One of the feedback I heard from developers is that, okay, I'm getting started with AWS. Which service should I use to do XYZ? And usually the answer is, it depends. We have 3 or 4 services that allows you to do that. And here Amplify made this choice already. So can we say it's an opinionated framework?
Of course, it's an opinionated framework. So we do the decision for you. This way you don't need to worry about which one is better. How should I use it? Or what should I care the most about between these technologies? We try to bring you the best out of the best, and we provision the resources in a way that it is effective and efficient for you to use.
It's not only choosing the correct service, but it's also pre-configuring that service in a way that makes sense for a front-end application with the default security, architecture, the best practices are in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So for example, in case you want to have a certain type of login mechanism, you will be able to have that directly integrated with a service behind the scenes called Amazon Cognito. But as a front-end developer, you don't care. You just want to log in. But all the benefits that Cognito brings will be also available for you to use with the libraries. So this way, you can connect or bring your idea into realization without thinking about which services to use and so on. So these decisions and configurations are made by AWS engineers for you. And as a front-end developer, you will do the best thing that you do. You will code the front-end part of it and connect to it by using the libraries.
And you can still customize it, but we are going to talk about that later, which is the good part. Of course, if you want to change the default that we provide you, you have access to that. Okay. What are the platforms? You said web and mobile application. Can you list, I count 9 different platforms. I have the screen under, I have the list on the, but what are these nice platforms?
I mean, we support almost all the web frameworks. We have support for React, we have support for Vite, we have support for Next.js, and we have support for also vanilla JavaScript in case you want to do everything by yourself. And I think there are more, but I don't remember it by heart right now.
Angular also.
Angular is getting a lot of love, so we need to also keep that in mind. And also from, like, I've been a mobile developer, like mobile application developer for like all my career. That's why the mobile aspect gets me really exciting, because we have support for native iOS and Android, as well as the cross-platform tools like React Native and Flutter. And all of this,
you managed to remember the list by heart.
Yep. I just missed Angular. I hope I don't offend any Angular fans or out there, you know.
So when you say native, it's native with Kotlin, Java for Android, and Swift for iOS developer. That's correct.
Absolutely. And the advantage of, for example, Swift in this case is, since the SDK is written by Swift developers in mind, we also have support for not only iOS, but also macOS as well, when they want to build apps. And
tvOS, and I saw a branch with experimental support for visionOS as well. So we are expanding that.
Exactly. visionOS was something that I was about to say as well. Yeah.
Oh,
visionOS. Yeah, no worries. visionOS, it is quite interesting. The moment that it was released, the team also released the experimental support for visionOS and using Amplify apps as well, which was pretty cool.
And I mentioned branch, so it means it's stored somewhere on GitHub. It's all open source. Both the CLI and all these frameworks for different language and platforms and frameworks are open source.
Absolutely. So Amplify libraries, especially, we are highly open source oriented organization. So what we do is we always take a look at what the customers want from us. We always go through the issues, answer the questions. We have an active community on GitHub as well as Discord to get your feedback and answer your questions as well. I will share the links, and we can share with the audience too if they want to join and ask their questions. And
as usual, I will put the link in the description of the podcast. So whatever podcast app you use, you scroll down a bit and you will find the link to the GitHub and to the Discord. That Discord is super active. There are a lot of persons with very active discussing feature development, providing peer-to-peer support as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it comes with customer obsession, right? Like we want to have like one by one customer time as much as we can with the users of Amplify. So when they have a question, we want to answer them as soon as possible. And Discord is there. We have great engineers who are taking care of it, as well as like I'm there and many other DAs, and actually the SDK engineers are there as well to answer questions. So for us, the most important point is we want to give you the best developer experience possible with AWS Amplify.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. What is the developer experience? What is the typical workflow? So I start with a project. I have my Hello World type of project already there, React, Swift, Android, whatever. What's next?
Okay, so should I segue into my next topic? Or should I? uh, I mean, once you have your project ready, the first thing that you will do is you will define what kind of backend would you like to create, because Amplify has actually two different ways of creating backends. So one way is the first and initial way. If you have played around with backend before, it is called Amplify Gen1. You will be using Amplify CLI, and Amplify, once you have your project, you will go to your root folder and Amplify CLI, which is a command line interface that you will be using to create Amplify applications and manage it. And it is bound and it is connected to your AWS account. And once you're there, you will just say Amplify init, and it will automatically understand the type of project that you're in, and it will ask you, what do you want to do? Then you can create and initialize your project. Next thing is adding the features. By adding the features, you will do Amplify add and whatever you want to add. Like, do you want to add storage? You will say Amplify add storage. Do you want to add an API category like GraphQL API? You will say Amplify add API. And the intuition that I have mentioned earlier on will come in handy here. The CLI tool will ask you a few questions like, what do you want to have? What kind of API you want to create? What kind of authorization rules do you want to build in? Do you want to use your users to be the authorization mechanism? Or do you want to have API keys? Anything that you decide, it will give us a chance to create this backend in the way that is defined by you with this simple question. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, you push these changes to the cloud, and your backend is ready to be used.
So Amplify push is the command to use to create the backend in the cloud. It also generates a configuration file that you just need to import into your project, so that the libraries inside your project knows where is the backend.
Absolutely. And also we generate the model classes for your data as well. So if you want to create or delete or read any type of data, we will be generating the files or model classes for you. And you can have direct access to it in a type-safe way in all the platforms that we provide to you. This way, you would know what data you're bringing, and you can also define filtering mechanisms as well, like predicates like equals to some item, a property of a model, or greater than, smaller than, includes, etc. This will give you a chance to filter the data on the cloud, not on the front end. This is, I think, really important to mention, because we do not bring the whole data set to you. We will bring in whatever you want from us directly to your app, not the whole data set and do the filtering on the front end side.
Can we map the different AWS services that are used for those that knows about AWS? So for authentication, you mentioned it already, it's Cognito.
I mean, yeah, like for all the services that we use, Amplify is not magic. It's, in the beginning, like I said, it is an abstraction layer over AWS services. So one thing that to mention, actually really important here, is Amplify itself is free. You will be only paying for the services that you will be using behind the scenes. So if you want to use a file storage mechanism, behind the scenes, you will be using Amazon S3. And S3 will be the service that you will be charged for, not the libraries, not the CLI tool, not the abstraction effort that we put in together.
Yeah, only for the backends consumption usage. So for S3, for example, you pay per gigabyte per month, exactly. And the first 5 gigabytes per month are for free.
Exactly.
For Cognito, you pay per active user, and the first 50,000 active user per month are for free, and so on and so on. So Cognito, S3, What else?
Yeah, we have for the data, we have GraphQL API and REST API. For the REST
Mm-hmm.
API, we are using API gateway and Lambda functions to create a REST API for you.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the apple of my eye, personal opinions, the GraphQL API. GraphQL API is actually using AppSync. If you've listened to Derek's podcast, you might know about it already.
Mm-hmm.
And DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL
No SQL.
database that you can use to store your data. So everything, every service that we mentioned here for the GraphQL API services is used, and the charging will happen only for using them. Also, we have our own interpretation of the Lambda functions, and we call them functions. So you will intuitively get that it is a Lambda function. So behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes, it will be using and generating Lambda functions, but from the developer experience perspective, with the Gen 1, we will create those by selecting them over CLI, and the generated Lambda functions will be used and connected to the services that you already have with the Amplify as well. And what else? Like we have many tools like analytics. Analytics is using Pinpoint behind the scene.
Mm-hmm.
We have push notifications. It is using the Pinpoint and Pinpoint's marketing strategy as well. These categories are supported by all the platforms that I mentioned. But for web, there are more categories as well. You might be asking why web is supported.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tell a like tiny bit of story about Amplify and how it is, like how it has started, because I think it's really important to keep in mind that why there are more things on web and feature parity is still coming, of course, but still it will take some time. Uh, so Amplify was a project of a few engineers back in the days. They thought, okay, this would be a great idea to have an abstraction over AWS services, because as front-end developers, we don't want to meddle around with the cloud resources because people are always afraid of the consequences that might happen. So when it started off, it was a JavaScript project, and all the necessary information, all the necessary backend building mechanism was happening with JavaScript. Then the CLI and other tools came in. And with the CLI, we also had one thing that I really need to mention here is Amplify also has a hosting service for web applications. So you can host your React application, Next.js application, any kind of web application on Amplify hosting. It is directly connected to your Git flows, so you can define when and from which branch you would like to create your production environment. In addition to this, you can also take advantage of the features like server-side rendering came up with many other platforms or many other frameworks like Next.js. And thanks to these cutting-edge technology support that we have with hosting, with the web, you will be able to actually build up your applications with high performance and with an easy setup as well.
Yeah, you as a developer, you don't need to create your CI/CD pipelines for web application. Amplify hosting take care of that for you. So it creates the pipeline and deploy it. It supports multiple branch, as you mentioned. So it will create different backend for every branch in your Git repository. That's super powerful as well. Let's go back a bit because we were talking about the developer experience, and you described the developer experience with the Amplify command line, but you say that's generation 1.
Yes.
So I guess there is a generation 2. What is different? What are we changing with the Gen 2 that has been released like a few months ago?
Yeah, for me, this is one of the most exciting projects that I have worked on. The reason is that we have been listening to the customers a lot. We've been listening to what they were telling us about the Amplify Gen 1. What did they like and what did they didn't like, or how can we improve the developer experience? And mainly the feedback was around they liked everything with Amplify, but they were not so sure about how this abstraction was helping them because they didn't understand what we were doing. So they wanted to understand more about what they were doing. Because if you look at the Amplify Gen 1 folder structure, you have many folders that is doing what they're supposed to do to give you a good developer experience. But as a developer, we're always curious, right? We want to know what's going on behind the scenes, and we say, okay, what if I change this? And all of a sudden, things get broken. And with Amplify Gen 1, customers wanted to do more, but they were afraid. Also, they wanted to support the services that Amplify doesn't support. And they wanted to have more flexibility with what they want to have. Also, they wanted to have a better developer experience while working with the team as well, because they wanted to create different environments and so on. Even though they could do it with Gen 1, it always felt a bit more complicated than it should be to them. So we collected this feedback and we actually did a big rewrite of Amplify Gen 2. We collected that feedback and we actually did a big rewrite of Amplify and we call it Amplify Gen 2.
So what's new with Amplify Gen 2?
With Amplify Gen 2, the biggest change that we have is it is powered with CDK.
Oh, what is the CDK? I can answer very briefly. Cloud Development Kit, but what is Cloud Development Kit?
Yeah, and CDK is an infrastructure from code tool that AWS provides to you. So you will be writing your cloud definition by using the programming languages that you already know, like TypeScript, JavaScript, Java, Golang, and many more. And you will define all the services with different building blocks that it brings to you. And at the end of the day, I always tell building blocks because it feels like you bring all of this together to build up a shape like children's building blocks.
Like a Lego
Exactly.
game.
Exactly.
But in the past, so it's infrastructure as code, but in the past, infrastructure as code was JSON or a bit better YAML.
Yep.
But there is no logic in YAML, or you can reuse beside copy pasting. So CDK, it's infrastructure as code, but real code, like with Java or JavaScript. So you can create a struct, you can create a loop, you can create a condition, a if. So it's really infrastructure as code. And we, AWS, come with a set of libraries, high-level construct, like if you want to create a Kubernetes cluster, load balance, blah, blah, blah. It's 2 lines of code and it does everything for you. So that's the foundation for Amplify Gen 2.
Exactly. And the biggest advantage that it brings is anything from Construct Hub, which is where these building blocks live, you can use it with Amplify now. This is one of the biggest advantages. The second advantage is the developer experience that we bring is fully taking advantage of type safety of TypeScript. So you will be defining your backend by using TypeScript. And thanks to this, you will have a frontend and backend can be written with TypeScript directly. And this is one of the biggest, this was one of the biggest asks from the customers because they wanted to use the same language that they already know in both frontend and backend. And
for the web application
for
development.
the web applications.
But for the native, so we have the backend written in TypeScript, and of course on the front end you can choose either TypeScript with React and Angular and all the ones you mentioned, or Swift and Kotlin or Dart. So and now we have type safety on the backend definition as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And if you're a mobile developer who is using React Native, you can also take advantage of the type safety on the mobile side as well. One thing that we do is we brought in the code generation capabilities that we already have on Gen 1 with us to Gen 2 too. So once you have your application ready, written with TypeScript, all the data and models are created with Amplify Gen 2, you can generate your front-end code to the respective platforms like Dart, Kotlin, Swift, whatever you have, or we will automatically generate the front-end code for you to use for React Native, React, and all the other web frameworks as well. So type safety on the backend is also giving us a chance to properly or more safely create the code on the front-end side as well.
And Amplify Gen 2, I mean, the team developing Amplify Gen 2 came with these high-level CDK construct that make it easy to create backend services for Amplify. But at the same time, they give access to the underlying object at CDK level. So if I want to modify the Cognito configuration or the AppSync configuration, I just can add code to the backend definition of provided by Amplify.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the biggest advantages of the Gen 2 is that the flexibility that you have. Because back then you had this magic happening. You didn't know where to change, what to do. But now, with the intuition that you have, you can go ahead and say that, okay, I know that with data I have API created with AppSync, and I want to add a new HTTP data source to it. How can I add it? I will just get the AppSync and say add HTTP data source, and you can bring in any HTTP data source that you want. On the front-end web and mobile blog, we have a nice blog post by one of our colleagues for calling generative AI on Amazon Bedrock to create recipe applications. And what it does is it creates a backend with Gen2, and it adds the Amazon Bedrock into AppSync by adding it as an HTTP resource, HTTP data source.
And that's done at the CDK level on your laptop, and it will generate everything on the server side. What is the new developer workflow for Gen2? There is no more Amplify command line.
Exactly.
That's a win. We don't have to install that piece of software and have it globally on my laptop and update it every 2 weeks. So what's the workflow? Where do I start?
I mean, for me, the best advantage is that. So no need to do any CLI anymore. And so let's go back to your initial question. You have your new project ready. How do you start with Amplify Gen2? First of all, by using NPM, you need to have NPM on your device. So
that's the requirement. I need to have nodes and NPM installed on my laptop. Okay.
Exactly.
Even if I'm developing for Swift on Android.
Exactly. You need to have NPM because the tool itself, since we're using TypeScript or JavaScript environments, we're using Node Package Manager, which is Node is the environment mainly for JavaScript environments as well.
Okay.
So what you will do is, okay, the second requirement is, of course, having an AWS account, but there's what
let's assume that
goes without saying, I guess.
Yep.
So once you do that, now we have a new command coming with NPM called create amplify. So in your project, you will call create amplify command, and it will ask you, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want me to create an Amplify project in this folder? Because back then you need to go to that folder and select and everything. Now you don't need to. Now you can define in case you're in a different folder or something. And once you do that, click on enter. It will create everything, every file that you need, which should be three files and 2 files for the packages, and that's it. So before you had like 8 different folders and all the files inside it, but now what you have is you will have an auth folder, which is having a file called resource.ts. This means for authentication, you need to go to the auth folder and change something in the resource.ts. Or you'll go to the data folder and go to the resource.ts and change something there for GraphQL API that you will be generating. Do you want to add a new service like functions? You will create a new folder called functions. And thanks to that, thanks to the previous knowledge that you have, you will create a new file called resource.ts and create your function over there.
And there are npx scripts as well that will scaffold the basic files that I need.
Absolutely. You can also do that as well. The idea is to make it even more easier than it was before to have a better developer experience. And the next thing that you will do, without even changing anything, by the way, if you want to see what you have created now, which is my favorite feature that we have brought in, now we have per developer sandboxes. What we mean is, if you want to work on your backend, but if you don't want to break anything by accident, or if you want
for the team.
Exactly. If you don't want to break anything for anyone or even for yourself, now what you will do is you will have the npx, which is the executable command that we brought in with the create amplify command. And you will call anpx, which is amplify executable again, and you will say sandbox. And it will create AMPX sandbox will create a sandbox environment for you. It will provision.
A sandbox environment, it's a cloud environment just for me. So exactly. It will create a Cognito, an AppSync, a DynamoDB, everything just for my directory.
Exactly.
and give me the configuration file that I can import into my project.
Exactly. That is perfect, right? Like you will have per developer, like for you only. So you can break it down, you can play around with it before you actually submit it for others to review.
Or for merging into the main project. Talking about merging, we do support GitOps workflow as well. So if I want to go to prod, I just have a command to publish and to create a production environment, but then I can link with my GitHub. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that is another great new thing that we brought into the table. Before we had this Amplify push, right? And if you wanted to have automated systems and so on, you also always needed to work extra. You needed to have this headless Amplify, bring in any information with secrets and so on. So what we did is we brought in any Git-based provider that you have into the table. For example, if you have a project on GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, or CodeCommit, you can bring any Git provider with the correct access information. So after you select that, the Amplify console will automatically understand what kind of project that you're working on, which is something that I also put emphasis on. We have also reworked our approach to Amplify console UI. When you used Amplify console UI before, you always only had the list of projects. And with the list of projects, when you go in, it was saying, okay, do you want to see this? Click on this to go to that service. Click on that to go to that service. We have fixed this problem with Amplify Studio, but it was an external tool as well that we have officially supported it, but it was still an extra tool. Now, every information that you have is available for you in Amplify console. And Amplify console is smart enough to understand what kind of project that you're building and what kind of deployment you want to do. You can have a UI selection over which branch you want to deploy or how many branches you want to deploy. Because since it is Git-based, you can define how many branches that you want to deploy, and you can define a QA environment, you can define a staging environment, and you can define a production environment with different branches. And thanks to the Git, it can be managed by the Git's simple branch mechanisms.
So when I link my Git account, GitHub account, let's take GitHub to simplify, but you said it works with others as well, from the Amplify console. And when I push a change on my main branch, it will update the backend if the backend needs to be updated. But if I create another branch for another environment or a feature I'd like to test, it will create a new cloud backend environment specifically for the change for the branch that I'm pushing to. And then from my laptop, I can connect to Amplify to get the configuration file. I want to get the configuration file from prod, which is something I need to do in my CI/CD, for example, or get the configuration file for test environment or for my local personal seb environment, the time to test a feature. And just by recompiling my application, in the case of a Swift or Android application, I integrate the JSON file pointing to the correct backend, and voila, and that's it.
Yeah.
And if we close a branch, it deletes the environment. I found that a bit magical. Just delete the branch after a merge, and it deletes. So I stop paying for that environment as well.
Exactly. And for the environments, for example, in case you need to generate these configuration files in testing or something that you need for another flow that you have, having these commands independent from a CLI tool that you need to install is a big advantage as well. So you can have the Apple ID and you can have the branch that you have, and you can generate this configuration file with a single command as well. So whenever you need any information, the idea from us to make it more easier and effective to pull in directly to your project as easy as possible. So for example, I created a branch and I say, hey man, like, can you test this out? And you will just go copy the project ID, copy my branch name, and just generate the configuration file on your device and run it on Android, iOS, Flutter, React Native, whatever you have. And you can even generate the models as well because you are pulling in the configuration. And that's it. This way you will be able to test everything again.
So let's try to recap what you said. Amplify Gen2, Generation 2. First, it's available today. You can try it. Three big change. First, there is no more Amplify command line. You just use npx and the node and npm package manager to initialize your project, add feature to your project, and deploy to a sandbox.
Sure.
A sandbox, it's a cloud environment just for your project. Second big change is that the files that you have inside your project are based on the CDK. It's the Cloud Development Kit, infrastructure as code. And me, as a developer, I can customize the default infrastructure provided by Amplify. So if I want to tweak the parameters, I can just edit lines in these CDK, not CloudFormation, CDK files in TypeScript to change the configuration of the backend. And third, there is a perfect integration and match into a typical GitOps workflow where each branch on my Git will be mapped by one cloud environment like dev, test, or temporary feature development environment with automatically delete of the environment and a very easy mechanism to pull a configuration file for one specific environment to include into my application so that my frontend talks to the correct backend environment. That's the three big change I see in Gen2. Do I miss any?
I mean, of course, like if we had like 10 more hours, I could talk about 10 more hours. But
no, it's a recap.
Exactly. But the thing is, everything TypeScript being TypeScript first environment and creating the backends with TypeScript and generating code for the front end in a type safe way is another advantage. Also, we have the monorepo set up, so different teams can share the same backend easier than it was before. For example, we have simulated that scenario with configuration file creation and so on. And overall, we have many things that we have done, and we will be doing many more as well. But I will let the audience also play around with this right now. Amplify Gen2 is available, like you mentioned, so they can create.
Yeah, give it a try.
Yeah, they can have authentication. They can have GraphQL API storage functions working for them. But if they have any favorite CDK constructs, they can always bring them in as well. We have tutorials and we have guides that they can use our documentation page. And as usual, if they have any feedback about those as well, they can just create a GitHub issue and we will be on top of it. Yeah.
I'll start a discussion on Discord as well. If as a developer I adopt Amplify today, what can I expect in the future? I know that AWS is not talking about the specifics of the roadmap, but generally, what are the direction? What is the direction where we're going?
We are doubling down on the features and the support that we have on Gen2, and we keep working on that. So they will see some more momentum on that side. In addition to this, we are also, customers are asking a lot about a migration guide from Gen1 to Gen2. We're aware of it. I can assure that the team is aware of it, and we are working on it. No timelines or deadlines about this one, but
no,
just to
we are working on it.
Exactly, just to assure everyone, because this has been a question that I've been asked a lot of time. I know we have many customers who are using Gen1 and they want to jump into Gen2 and they want to make it into a more swift experience. And there are more capabilities coming in to Amplify Gen2 as well, so stay tuned for that as well. And last but not least, the Gen1 is one thing that I want to emphasize is like Gen1 is not dead or something. We still have support and everything. We will be having that around as well. Amplify Gen2 is something new, something exciting for many developers. But another thing that I want to assure who Gen1 customers who are listening to this, we are not abandoning you somewhere randomly. I mean, that's not, of course, that's not the AWS way as well, but just to reassure you, we also have resources on Gen1 to help you out with the problems that you might have and so on.
to continue to address and to fix issue and,
Exactly.
and to provide update with generation 1 as well. But the rule is, if you start a new project, start with Gen 2. If you have an existing G1, we will continue to support you, of course. And at some point in the future, we will even have a migration from a Gen 1 configuration to a Gen 2 configuration. That's what to summarize what you said. Okay,
absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Mohamed Salih Gouler, you're developer advocate for Amplify. You're working a lot with developers for front-end application, web and mobile native. Thank you for having made a tour of Amplify in general and a deep dive on Amplify Gen2. There are a lot of resources available online. I will put the links in the notes of this podcast, being on the web or in your favorite application. Thank you for having listened to this episode until the end. I see you next week for another episode. It will be Friday morning, available in all your podcast application. But until then, go build.